And welcome once again to another edition of Footnotes. Pastor Mark here. Today, I'm so excited about the gentleman that sits next to me in the studio. I wish you could see his smiling face, but instead I'll describe it to you. He's smiling. Welcome, Ali Chambers. Now, it's not Ollie, how one pastor used to call you, right. O-L-L-I-E,
right.
Ollie.
Right.
It's Ali,
yes.
like Prince Ali.
There you go.
Fabulous he.
Which I hate that connection, but it happens anyway.
Well, Ali is with us today on Footnotes, and he is going to be talking about diversity. And I think this is going to be a great episode that's going to challenge us to think and worship and praise God in a greater way.
Yeah.
So welcome, Ali.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to be with you. You were my youth pastor. For
yes.
years.
Yes.
Yeah, failed to mention that.
Well, I failed to mention that because I was probably a bad youth pastor. Do you think I was a bad
youth?
youth?
No, you were good. You were a mentor.
A mentor.
I was in need of that at that moment. You came at the right time.
Yes. You know, the Apostle Paul says he doesn't remember who he baptized, but I do remember that I baptized you.
Yeah, because it was 2 or 3 times.
No, it was not 2 or 3. I only baptized you once.
Right.
But now you did struggle as a teenager with a lot of things.
Yeah.
And one of those things was assurance of salvation. And I always think about you when I go through 1 John because you and I think, went through 1 John many years ago, 25 years ago, and we talked about what it means to struggle with salvation and how that operates. And through that, you said, I need to get baptized.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's
and,
good.
You know, and I look back on that and just realize that it was a part of me growing in my faith. And I think God allowed, I don't regret any of that. I just know that my understanding of what it means to be a Christ follower and where my trust was still developing.
Well, and something that our listeners can't see that I think is pertinent to the discussion we're going to have, and this was something that was pertinent to your years growing up. You struggled as well to find your place because you were first. I mean, there's no order here, but first you were African American.
That's right.
So if I look at you, I would think probably African American.
That's right.
But your mother and her entire family, who I loved, and do you remember me coming? How many parties did I come to? Where I would meet your uncles and
at least twice.
Yeah, like a graduation party, a birthday party.
Yeah,
and I would come to these parties, and your family is all Persian.
Right. My mom is from Iran.
Iran,
born and raised. Yeah.
Yes. And so you are African American and Iranian.
Right.
Hence the name Ali.
Yes.
And so growing up in Memphis, Tennessee, you always struggled. Am I black? Am I white? Am I Iranian? Where do I fit? We attended, you and I, your family, me as the youth pastor, we attended a really diverse church. Ironically, it was a Baptist church planted by white people in the 80s in the Hickory Hill area off of Riverdale Road in Rains.
Yep.
Yet almost every season of life in that church, and they're no longer in existence, sadly, to this day, but that church always had a really good balance. I would say 60-40%, of 60% maybe white, 40% other diversity.
Right.
And people would come and visit, and they would be shocked. They would say, oh, my gosh, I can't believe how diverse you guys are. And this was the 90s, when this wasn't cool.
Right. And I don't know if you knew, my family was the first family of a different ethnicity to attend Liberty.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I thought, what was the other couple's name? They had the 2 daughters.
Yeah, I know. I don't remember their name, but they
Claudia and
they came after we came.
After you came.
Yeah,
okay.
And then a few others.
Yeah.
Yeah, so our family was like a pioneer.
And and of course Miss Maurice, who we love, and she's now a member of your church.
That's right.
So Ali grew up struggling with diversity himself, trying to find his way. Now Ali is a church planter, and I just have to say, well, no. You planted a church.
Yes.
But now you are a pastor.
Yes, that's right.
The church is not a plant any longer.
We try to use that language. We're not a plant anymore. We're established. We're about to hit our 10-year anniversary next year.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's awesome. And
Yeah.
so I look across the table at this young man who became a pastor, who had a heart to reach diverse people in Memphis, and the Lord has blessed you because he now pastors Mosaic Church.
That's right.
And I got to just be a part of supporting you in that, right?
Right.
Just
Right.
our church in Texas supported you.
Right. Heavily supported. It was really, really important to have that, and you were one of the big ones that helped us.
Well, I was thrilled, that you were wanting to do this with your life, and so you planted this Mosaic Church, and there's diversity there today. And I
Right.
love the name. The name was intentional.
Right.
We want to be a
Right.
Mosaic. Now, you guys meet currently. You took over the old, what was it, McLean
Baptist Church. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a long story, but eventually that church declined, and it was the property was given to a church called Living Hope, which was their main campus was in Piperton. Pretty large church, and then they planted a church in the Midtown area, the Valentine Evergreen area, and then they based that ministry out of McLean, and McLean at some point said, "Why don't you just take the building?" So they gave the building over.
Isn't that great? Praise God.
Yeah.
So now Ali's church, which you
Right.
guys are doing well. I
Yeah.
mean, everything I see on Facebook that you guys post, I get your text. I'm on
Right.
some. I guess I'm part of your
Email?
church thread.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know, but I
We
get
have
it
you
all.
as a member.
Yes, that's fine. That's great. So when they get rid of me here, I'll have a church
Right.
to go
That's
to.
right.
So you guys seem to be adding people constantly. You're reaching the community. Not long ago, you and I went up and you toured me around the building, and you're actually renting your building to 2 other organizations.
Well, actually, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Man, you're just an entrepreneur, Pastor Ali.
Well, that I don't get the credit for that.
Okay, but what are the organizations that meet in your building?
Yeah.
So that people who might work with those organizations listening go, I've been there.
Right.
I've been to that church.
Right.
So what are they? Because they're pretty impressive. What is the
Yes.
one that built the whole missions beds and kitchen?
So there's one organization, City Leadership, which is the one that created Serve 901, Choose 901 movement. And so their missions arm is called Serve 901. It's in a partnership with St. George's School, and they created a bunkhouse in our building that sleeps about 120 people. And the goal of that is to allow Christian groups, mission teams that come to Memphis, college groups to come to Memphis. But one of the things, and serve in the city and have a place to stay, it's beautiful. Renovated. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to make that space look good. And one of their goals is to recruit new, young professionals to Memphis and give them a great experience to come and be a part of the city. And so that's in our building. They took, and I mean, that happened years before we got there.
And then there's other organizations.
There's a preschool, Valentine Evergreen Neighborhood School. There's Memphis Family Connection Center, which is a Christian counseling organization that first began with counseling parents who are adoptive parents, particularly those parents who adopt outside of their ethnicity, which was common for a lot of those parents. And so they help work with those families, counsel the kids that come from rough backgrounds. But now it's expanded. I mean, they see kids and youth across the spectrum. And then we have multinational ministries, which is a ministry, a nonprofit that works with refugee families, and they're heavily supported by Hope Church in Cordova, and they occupy the lower section of where our fellowship hall is.
So all these organizations use your building, which is
Yes.
good for you because it's an old, super large,
Right, very big
Southern
building.
Baptist church that
That's
died.
Right. That's right.
And your steeple
Right.
is 1,000 times worse
Right.
than our
That's
steeple.
right. It's pretty big.
Your steeple is bigger. That thing looks like it's going to topple the whole building.
Yes.
So I often think when I look at your steeple and the problems, you're like, what do we do with that? It would cost $1 million to refurbish this steeple.
Yes.
But we want to use that money for ministry.
Right.
But you have this growing church. The church seems to be doing so good. A lot of people, some people from Liberty and from the youth group that I was a joy to be a part of, like Anna, are in your church. They're serving in your church. And so I'm thrilled to see you doing the calling that God has placed on your life and how you are ministering in the city of Memphis at Mosaic Church. Now, the reason I brought you here today, I want to talk specifically about diversity. You and I have had some really good personal, private conversations about diversity, about church, about how that works, about communities changing, and some of the things you've said to me over lunch. Sometimes I'm like, "That's incredible. We need to talk about that. We need to get that message out to more people on some." This is not a big platform, but the people that would listen, church members, it would educate them. It would benefit them. So in a good way, it's just another shepherding tool. So what I want to do with you today is just talk about diversity. Since you are a black man, an Iranian man, and a Memphian, and a pastor,
right?
And I used to say this to you, and this was probably horrible. This is why I was a horrible youth pastor. But you also attended like an all-white school. You went to Christian Brothers. High school.
Right, high school. Yeah.
And you were always, my joke to you was, you are the whitest black guy I know. Because you were sometimes whiter than I was. I was blue collar, and Ali's up here at white collar at school, and I'm like, what do you mean you're struggling with your ethnicity and your background? And you really, honestly, you walked in all the worlds. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
You walked in it. You walked in the white world. You walked in the African American world. You walked in the Iranian world, and God used that to bring you now to where you are pastoring mosaically, and it's just beautiful how God does that and uses our past. But you've had conversations and educated me, and I'm like, okay, I've never thought about that. That's a great point. We also, you and I, went through the change that we saw in the Hickory Hill area. I lived there, pastored there on staff. Your family was there. The church that we loved and attended no longer exists. Part of that, there's a lot of reasons for that, but part of it is it didn't know how to adapt. It did not know how to adapt to the culture. It tried. I mean, credit where credit is due. It attempted for many, many years to stay faithful right there where God had put it. And to be fair, it was already diverse. It was already diverse. And you think, well, this should have no problem.
Right.
But it just created all these issues. And, I say this now, and people don't want to see this. They don't want to talk about this. But I am seeing hints of that starting to take place right around us here. And I'm smart enough to know, I've lived through this, and I'm smart enough to know, okay, Memphis is coming down, whatever you want to call that. It's coming down. And the city is growing. When I grew up in this community of DeSoto County, it was rural. Rural, however you say that. It was rural. I grew up in the country. You had to drive 15 minutes to State Line Road to go to a McDonald's or a Sonic or a Walmart. So now you can't even tell where the distinction lines are. You have to have a sign that says this is South Haven and this is Olive Branch.
Right.
You can't tell the distinction. When I was growing up, I remember we lived in Nesbitt, and we would take Goodman Road, Horn Lake, all the way to Goodman Road, Olive Branch, where the Dodge's store is. My grandmother lived behind the old, or right off of the old high school. She lived in the neighborhood that jets right out from the old high school. So when we would pack up to go to her house for Christmas or whatever, it was like a long journey. There's nothing in between Horn Lake, when you get past I-55, and the Dodge store. So, you better take water or something. You better take something to do.
Right.
And now it's hilarious to me to think that used to be the experience, that it was nothing. I mean, I remember where the academy and the Target and all that is now, Pleasant Hill. I mean, you'd get to that four-way stop, and those were two churches, the two-church stop. And that was it. That was all that was there, just two little churches. And then you'd move on, and you knew we're almost there. We're almost to Olive Branch.
Right.
So now it's just this big metropolis, and with that brings a lot of issues. So people are doing one of two things. They're saying, okay, well, I'm here, and I don't know what to do with that, or they're running to Coldwater. You know, at Tate County, Marshall County, that's where everybody's going, and every person will tell you, Tate Marshall, buy land now. And my thing is, how far are you going to run? Because Jackson is moving north, they're running, and Memphis is moving south. So eventually, the suburbs will be, you know, I don't know, Yazoo City or something. It will all be just commuting from some weird spot, you know, in the middle of Mississippi somewhere. Grenada will be the new suburb of Memphis and Jackson. So there comes a point when people have to just be honest and say, well, we're going to just stay. This is where we're going to love our neighbor, and we're going to deal with what's going on. And, you know, yes, the world changes. That's the whole way this works. Always has, always will. Not going to stay the same. So as a church, you know, pastorally, I've got to think, so how do we handle that? You know, when we see these things happening around us. So this is where your wisdom, Ali, is going to instruct us.
I'm going to fix all the
You're
problems.
going to fix all the problems, Ali.
Well, you know, it's complicated, but it's simple at the same time, because I think we have to first ask the question, as Christ followers, how do we respond to changes that is different than the community around us, you know? Although, you know, we feel like we live in the Bible Belt, it's not really that Christian as we think it is. There are non-Christians all around us that respond differently to these things. But as Christians, I think the first thing we need to do is think about what is God calling, like you said, what is God in all the new people and new changes happening around us? What is my role in that? I think sometimes we compartmentalize our lives and think, well, my church life is over here, my neighborhood's over here, my work is over here, and we don't really connect the dots. And one of the things that I talked about when we planted Mosaic, with an intentionality to be a place where everybody feels like they can belong, because that's really what it's about. It's not about becoming one thing or another thing. It's what we say all the time at Mosaic: how can we be different together through the gospel? And it's bringing down the barriers that keep us apart, where we all have to sacrifice at some point. But through the gospel, we're called to be one. And one of the things that I saw when I lived in Olive Branch, our first home was in Olive Branch.
You and your wife,
that's right.
Who, let me say, Ali doesn't do anything piecemeal or halfway. Ali said, I'm going to take this diversity thing to the nth degree. He married a genuinely Polish
girl.
Lady from Poland. So his kids are Iranian, African-American, Polish.
Yes, that's right.
All right.
They're all of the above.
I just wanted to add that because you really did Mosaic with your kids.
I always say our family is America. It's like this is what makes America great, I think, is the amount of diversity we have in the country. And our family reflects that. My sister married someone who's from Puerto Rico. So at our dinner table, or even Thanksgiving, we have so many different cuisines. When I was in Olive Branch, what I saw was that, you know, all of my neighbors were from different countries, or from different parts of life here in the United States. Some were white, some were Latino, there was a couple that was Thai, and he was from like the Northeast somewhere, I don't know. We had African American. We had people from different parts of Latin America, not just, you know, from Mexico, but from Honduras. My boys went to kindergarten at I forget the name of the school, Overpark Elementary, and some of the good friends we built and relations we built that even carried on into Memphis when we moved. We built in that school, and he had friends that were Latino, friends that were white, friends that were from all different walks of life. And one of the things that really fed into our vision for the church is, like, you know, our neighborhood is diverse, our mission field is diverse, but our church can't connect to that. And so what does it look like for our church to be able to, for me to be able to invite the people in my neighborhoods and in my lives to my church in such a way where it's not one thing or another thing, it's a place of belonging where people can feel they can connect. And so that's of course been my life, because I grew up in different communities. I grew up in the African American community with my dad, my cousins, working with my dad, cutting grass and doing landscaping. But then with my mom being from Iran, and then the Iranian culture is very communal, and they have all these social gatherings that they happen every single week. I got to be exposed in a significant way to Iranian culture. That led to my confusion and just trying to figure out where I fit in. But that really fit, as I became a Christian and went into ministry, it really fed how God was wiring me to for my story to be an impetus for the church, and what does it look like for us to be able to be different together, and while that's sacrificial and difficult at times, there's something beautiful that happens. And I always say this too, every church community is like that. If you think about it, we're not all the same just because we're all the same ethnicity. We don't have all the same backgrounds. We don't have the same story. We don't have the same economic background. So there's diversity in every single church. It just depends on what kind of diversity we're comfortable with and the level of sacrifice we're willing to make, And in the United States, one of the challenges for Christians is because there's so many churches and so many different communities, it's easy to find a niche that fits me and not have to fight through the gospel to be one, even though we're different. We can find a church that fits my economic background and my ethnicity. We can find a church that fills my ethnicity background, et cetera. And so just the real challenge is like, even as you think about your people and for them to think about their community, what does it look like to embrace your community and the changes as a part of your mission field? I know the challenge often is, well, the people who come into the community, they have a certain church background that they're used to, or maybe our church wouldn't be comfortable for them. And that's where the question is, then what is God saying in that? Is God saying that we should become more welcoming to that community, without losing who God made us to be? And I don't think you have to choose between the two. Oftentimes when we talk about the racial makeup of Memphis, it's been a very black and white narrative.
Literally
black and white. Yes,
but we don't think about all these other
but
groups.
It's not. I always say Mosaic's not black and white. We're multicolored, and that's because that's what Memphis is starting to become. And so you even have Latino neighbors. And so when our kids are starting to go to school together, and our kids are playing together, and our families are starting to get to know each other, that's our mission field. So then we ask the question, church is not just about me, it's about the mission of Jesus in the community, and what does that then look like for me to engage with that,
So let's pause and explore that a little more. Churches, ironically, have been some of the most segregated places in America.
Yeah.
Why? And you came at it from the black side, and I was blown away by what you said.
Yeah.
You started explaining to me why black people would not want to come to my church.
Right.
Now, explain that. And it's not what you might initially think as a listener.
Right.
It's wokeism or it's whatever.
Right.
No, it's not that.
Right.
And a lot of people are afraid to talk about these things. They're afraid. And the culture has feared us and shamed us into saying these words, black, white, whatever. Why is the church that way? On the white side, it may be one way. On the black side, there's another answer. I want you to start there.
Historically, the African American church has been a place of refuge and rest for African American culture. It's been a place of freedom of expression. Right, I can be in this space, and and we're talking about the racial tensions that existed years and years ago. Still some exist today, but that was really heavy. But they could come in this space, and that's their space. That's their home. They can be themselves unapologetically. And the church, one of the reasons why it's often hard to do that in the South is because you have, in the African American community in particular, when you talk about like their needs is that they're in what they consider like in a white community all the time. And so the church is a place that they can kind of let their hair down, so to speak. And oftentimes the desire to be in their own space isn't because they are somehow uncomfortable with white culture. It's more that they're the music, the style, the community, it's all a part of who they are, and that's an opportunity for them to express it. And I also say this with people too, and I say it at our church, like not every church is going to connect with everybody. Not every church is going to connect culturally to everybody, and there's something beautiful about the expressions of worship that we have that are different than one another. That doesn't mean that we don't also stretch ourselves and create space for those that might want that, want to be in communities that are different. But there's also a tension because, I appreciate, as someone who grew up with diversity, I appreciate all the different types of worship and different styles of ministry. In the black culture, there's, as true in the white culture, there's a way of communicating that's oftentimes different, but they're saying the same thing. And the way they say it is not, one side is not inferior to the other, one side is not superior to the other, it's just different. And so the challenge in Memphis, in a community like Memphis, because of that history and background, because of culture, it becomes hard sometimes to bring people together. And I always recognize the tension. At Mosaic, we're not going to be a church for all African Americans who's going to want to attend because we're not going to have a traditional kind of worship service. But then you can also say the same thing about all African American churches too. There are different types. There are more traditional and there are more modern types of worship, and they're very much different. And so it's the same in every community. You might have like white churches that are contemporary, might have white churches that are traditional, and you have people on both sides that say, I like this more than that. I don't know if the question is what do we have to craft at our church that we can connect people to. The question is, what is our mission field? And are we making our church, our community, our lives welcoming to those around us? Doesn't mean that all of a sudden tomorrow you have to become a whole nother style, but it does ask the question in your leadership meetings, in your staff, in your church at large, and as people are coming, like, am I making this church accessible to the community that God has put in our lives? That's the biggest question I ask. Like for us, we've got for example, a large group of Latinos that have connected with Mosaic, and that's always been our vision. Is because we're in a community with a lot of Latinos. How do we should be a church that is welcoming to Latino communities. So one thing we do, all of our scriptures translated in Spanish and in English. Our documents, our membership documents, we translate in Spanish and English. We have one of our elders, Luis Herrera. He's from Mexico. He became an elder a few months ago, and he's this week or next week going to be teaching our membership class to a couple from Venezuela, first generation, moved here as a refugee family, and are not English speakers. Primarily, they're learning English, but we have a handful of Spanish speakers in our church, both from Latino countries, but also Americans who can speak Spanish. And we're constantly stretching ourselves at church because these are people God has sent our way. How can we make Mosaic more welcoming? And these are just some really, really, really tiny ways that we've done it. But ultimately, like sometimes the things that we refuse to do that are different in our church are actually beautiful things that communicate to the community that is coming into your building that I see, I hear, and I want you to be here. So what are some small things that you could do to make yourself welcoming? And instead of like thinking about the first question people always ask when communities start to change or people from different cultures move in is, well, this is not comfortable anymore. I don't feel safe anymore. As Christians, I don't think those are the first questions that should come to our mind. What should come to our mind is, how can I pray and ask God, how is this new community, what is he saying should change in my mission field? And are these people that God is bringing a part should be a part of my community now that they're coming into our neighborhood.
That's excellent. I mean, what you're saying, very encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about on the white side.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So on the black side, you're saying, to sum it up, some people, they need the black church because it's their refuge.
Right.
There's multiple types of different black churches. It's really not about that.
Yeah,
We're not.
Which it'd be the same in white community as well. It's like, this is my culture. This is kind of
there's
the thing
traditional
hymn singing,
and then there's the super contemporary multi-site church in the white church, right?
And I sometimes challenge minority churches too. Is that sometimes we can become equally married to our style and neglect the mission. That's oftentimes a conversation for even minority churches is, how can you reach the community that's around you? If the community is how can your church become welcoming towards Latinos if that's in your neighborhood? It's not just something that I think white Christians should engage with. I think it's something that all Christians should engage with, that we don't become so married to our traditions, what Jesus talked about with the Pharisees often, that we don't make space.
Yeah. We have a case study, you and I, that we lived through.
Right.
Liberty Memorial Baptist Church. She no longer exists today as a local congregation. Now, they tried. So everything you're saying is good. I agree with it. It sounds good. Let's put it to practice. Why do you think, and you were on staff at Liberty, you followed me at some point, you were the youth pastor for a season. How many years were you there?
I was there for, I think, 6-7 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we both were on staff at this church, so we have some credibility to speak. We weren't, always at the end of it, but we have some credibility to speak. So why did it not work there? Because Liberty was already diverse.
Right.
They said, we're staying. I mean, they stayed until what, 2018?
Right. Somewhere around there, yeah.
Okay. And the community, to be fair, started changing in 1998.
Yeah.
So they stayed 10 years later. I could point out churches that left. Okay. I'm not saying they're right or wrong.
Right.
But down the street from us was LaBelle Haven Baptist Church.
Right.
They left. Chug-a-lug, Olive Branch.
Right.
They're huge today, all white people.
Right.
So somebody would look at that and say, now you see that worked for them. And then you had Hickory Hill Baptist Church, which chug-a-lugged, right? And I was on staff in the early 2000s at Hope Baptist Church in Olive Branch, which was Hickory Hill. And they were up there in the same area, and they left, and they're doing great today. And somebody would look at that and say, now, see, they're doing great. Liberty stayed and said, okay, we're here. We're going to try to reach our community, and they died.
Right.
So how do we, we're just being honest, how do we reconcile that?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, because it's, and I would say for Liberty, it was a few things that took place that precipitated that, if I said that word right. One was there was a sense of welcome, like in terms of people coming, but there wasn't an intentionality of allowing some changes in maybe their worship and their that caused like more kind of separation. I think on top of that, more than the ethnicity was the sense of mission and engaging the next generation. And there was a big disconnect that happened that even as the church moved from Hickory Hill, that continued, which it lived, I think, about 2-3 years in Olive Branch before it closed for good. And it had become very insular. And that's, for me, one of the biggest challenges of church today is for us not to become insular and become about ourselves, but to continue to push our people to be missionaries where they're at. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that they faced on top of the ethnicity. I think when you make a decision to in that case, you mentioned a lot of them. There was a lot of churches that, as Hickory Hill began to change, became primarily African American. a lot of those churches didn't want to try to change anything or to engage the community, and so they ended up leaving. And that's the question of whether that's right or wrong is really hard, because of our racial past, because of our differences, it becomes really difficult for these two communities to come together. And so I can't say whether they're right or wrong in terms of their leaving. I think, though, we have to ask the question, how do we respond differently to different people coming into our community, which is a bigger question. Because I believe that Hickory Hill, for example, didn't necessarily have to become what it became if people were willing to stay and willing to be a part of the community. As you see in different parts of Memphis that are pretty like entrenched in who they are, it has stayed that way for years, no matter what's happened around them. But it's a difficult question to ask, because at the same time, there are African American ministries that can thrive in that community and communicate the gospel in a way that really connects with the neighborhood around them. And so,
well, and can I push back a little bit, because to be fair to Liberty, and you were on staff there later than I was,
right?
So I can't speak to all that, but I do remember. Even when Jake was pastor, intentionally, like, we're going to go and we're going to be in this parade at the Hickory Ridge Mall, and none of these people in this parade are our ethnicity, but we want to reach out, or we're going to offer, what was the guy's name that was coming from Bellevue, and he was going to be the big church planter?
Yes.
Mike offered him the fellowship hall,
right.
And he was going to plant the church, and he was the next savior for
right.
the, whatever.
Right.
There were, I will say, I think they tried to reach out, and I'm only pointing that out because yes, we're all insular. Broadway is insular to a great degree, and they don't see that.
Right.
They don't see that at all.
Right.
But they, to a degree, we all are insular. Tom Rainer says in his book, Breakout Churches, which I love, and our pastors, I struggled when I made them read it, but I said it's a good book. He says one of the keys of a dying church is they begin to look inward, and they begin to think about the beauty of the fellowship hall and the prettiness of the building versus reaching the community. And that is the challenge for every church. Every church faces that. You can be in an all predominantly ethnic community, and you are that community, and you can still be dying.
Right.
Case in point, a lot of those churches that left Memphis came to South Haven, and I could name them right now, but I won't. And they're still dead today. Right. I remember I interviewed on the radio one of the pastors in the 90s who was moving his church. That sounds a lot like Broadway. He was moving his church from Whitehaven to Church Road. And, this is pastors and pastors ago. But I remember even on the radio, I could see that moment when I stumped him. And I thought, okay, I better back up because I'm going to embarrass him publicly. But I was like, well, do you think you're going to reach this community? You weren't able to reach that community. Do you think you're going to reach this community? And he didn't really have an answer to that. I think he thought, well, we're just going to move, and that's going to fix all of our problems. We're going to move where more white people are. Because we're white. And when we do that, they're just going to come. We're going to have a brand new building, and that's going to attract them. And sadly, lots of pastors think that way. But let's not just put it on pastors. Lots of lay people. And the lay people, let's talk about that. Because at Liberty, this is what I saw. A lot of people had opinions. And a lot of people wanted to make decisions, and when the going got tough, they left. They're not sticking around. I've told our staff, we're not worried about keeping people. We want everybody to stay in this church, but I'm going to tell you, some of these people are not going to stay with us. They have no skin in the game. They'll just walk out and go to somewhere else. And, you've got to do what's right for the church and what pleases the Lord. And you got to lead with that perspective. Because if you're trying to keep people and please people, what will these people think? Well, honestly, those people probably won't stick around, to be real honest with you. And some of those people, will go to heaven. The Lord will just graduate them to heaven, and they're not going to be here in 20 years. And that's what I saw at Liberty. I saw vocal people, businessmen, white collar, whatever. Everybody had an opinion. And then when this is what we need to do, this is what we don't need to do. And then when the going got tough, they walked out.
Right.
They walked out, and we were left holding the bag.
Yeah.
As the community changed, and they went to Collierville. Right. It was just easy for them to go to Collierville, where everybody was going at that point.
And that's why I say that one of the responses we have to make in discipling our people is to get them to see, or to challenge them constantly to see their lives differently than the world around them, to see their mission field as your neighborhood, not to compartmentalize your life. And that's why I think it's just so important when people, I'm not saying that fixes everything or makes it simple, because we do live we still live in a racialized culture and a racialized society that begins to be fearful of people who are different. I was in Atlanta this past week with a pastor's cohort that I'm in, and one of them is in Lawrenceville, which is a suburb of Atlanta. And he was just telling us that in the short time being there, that how the community has changed dramatically. And there, it's not black and white. There, it's like people from all over the world, all over the country, all over the world, different countries. And they, and so it's like, this is a Asian family, and this is an African family, and this is a Malaysian family, and it's just all mixed like that. And it's causing them to say, how are we going to reach our community in Lawrenceville that's making these transitions? And I think they're doing a good job trying to bring more people on staff and different things. But it's a challenge that involves more than just pack our bags and leave. It's a missional challenge, and I think that's why a lot of our churches are struggling. Churches that grow typically are growing just by transfer growth. We're not really reaching our community. That's hard. That means we have to live a different lifestyle. We have to open our lives up. The suburbs are oftentimes have the stereotype of, we have our fenced-in yard, a garage that we go park our car, close the garage. One of the reasons why at Mosaic we do so little in our building and we do so much in our homes is because we're trying to communicate viscerally through their experience. Your life is a life of mission. Your home, you open your home up. Even hospitality is one of the qualifications of an elder. You have to be hospitable means opening your life up, and so we have small groups called city groups, and it's meant to be a place where we come and we walk with each other in community. We eat with one another. We go through the Word together, and we're inviting people in our lives. And what I've seen that create within our people is a sense of mission, a sense of my neighborhood isn't just my problem or something to run away from. And we still have a lot of that, but it's something that we're to embrace in all of its messiness, And I think that's where we as Christians have to begin and think about. There's so many social dynamics that Liberty faced and other churches face that are out of their control. You can't control culture and communities and people movements. A lot of it, of course, is Christians moving, but a lot of it is just people moving. The whole neighborhood changes, and we're left to figure out as churches, how do we continue when everything around us is changing? And how do we maintain who we are as Christ followers while also maintaining a gospel presence in this community? And so I know it's really complicated, and things that are outside of your control, and so much of that relates to the racialized environment that Memphis is. But then I also go back to say, well, where does that come from? A lot of it comes from a lack of real discipleship and a lack of real sense of mission in your neighborhood and community. What could a Memphis look like that didn't run all the time, And it's not just Memphis; it's every city in America does this. But what does it look like for Christians to embrace the community? And if we created a critical mass of people who are engaged, our cities, our churches wouldn't die as quickly. And so it's both like the people movements that affect it, but also our understanding of the mission and our constant discipleship of being men and women who are engaged in God's mission in our city, in our neighborhoods, and whatever that might mean.
And I think, too, churches have to decide, do we want to reach the community we're in, or do we want to be big?
Right.
And let me be extremely fair here, okay? Because I failed to mention this.
Right.
I mean, I'm pastoring a church that moved. We used to be on Shelby Drive.
Right.
And, we are having these discussions pastorally, and I've got a young pastoral staff, about the changing community that we see happening slowly around us. And, people are holding out, Silo's going to keep it all together. And I'm like, maybe not, but, it doesn't matter. But if God's called us here, what do we do? And the question I posed to these young pastors was this: well, if Broadway had stayed on Shelby Drive, would she still be alive today? And I don't know the answer to that. I'm not going to say yes, because I don't know that people would have kept driving up there. I think older people who lived in that community would have stayed. But I don't know that DeSoto County people would have kept driving up to that location forever. And I
Which
think,
is why the complexity to it, because it's now they're not a neighborhood church anymore. Now it's a regional church or whatnot. And it's also a challenge to be a church in a neighborhood that isn't really a part of the neighborhood anymore. And there's a lot of churches like that, even that are ethnicity, their ethnicity matches the neighborhood, but they don't live in the neighborhood anymore. And we have a lot of that even in our neighborhood among minority churches. Sometimes you see that a lot of times where a lot of the people live in the suburbs and then they drive into the church. They still stay connected, but they're not really a part of the neighborhood anymore.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, and, we can all be critical of everybody else, but, it looks like in Memphis everybody's done it. Every white church at some point has moved, even Bellevue.
Right.
Bellevue was down on Bellevue. And not long ago, my youth pastor growing up, he came back to town. He lives in Indianapolis, and he went to the old Mid-America and all that. And so late night after a Grizzlies game, I said, well, let's drive down and see the old Jewish temple and where Bellevue used to be. And so we drove down. And he said to me, I wonder the impact Bellevue could have had if they had stayed in the downtown Memphis area. I wonder the impact they could have had.
Right.
But of course, for whatever reason, landlocked, money, I don't know. They said we're moving east. Well, now the irony is you have Six Flags Over Jesus, and you know what the terminology is on the street for Cordova? Dirty Dova.
Right.
The Dirty Dova. So now you're in the Dirty Dova. It's got crime. Wolf Chase Galleria is not the panacea of justice any longer.
And that's the question, though. We're supposed to be salt and light. Not like, running and leaving the communities. We're supposed to be there to be a gospel influence. One great example, it's not a completely fair example, but Second Presbyterian Church, and that's kind of on the heart of the city. They were in downtown. They moved east, but they stopped. And they stayed within the community no matter how the community has changed around them. And I've been able to see how much influence that church has been able to have in the city. And one of the things they do well that I've really come to respect is that they're demographically are still one thing, and they've made some really strong attempts to be more welcoming. They have minority leading worship. They have other minorities on staff, and they really try to love the city of Memphis very well. But they've also taken their resources and they've put them into a Spanish-speaking church in Berkeley area. They've put it in multi-ethnic churches. They, of course, Hope Church is one of their plants. They planted All Saints, and so
we're not talking about a Hope Church out on
Cordova.
That's a plant.
Yeah,
the big Hope Church.
Right. Yeah,
where they used to let you take coffee into the sanctuary.
Oh yeah.
That one,
the Big Hope. Yeah,
Hope
that was
Presbyterian Church.
That's it.
There's a place for you. That place.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I thought
yeah.
they were too hip to be out of Second Pres.
Yeah.
I've always loved Second Pres. Sandy
Yes.
Wilson.
Sandy Wilson was a
incredible.
great leader, and
Yes.
they pour a lot of resources
And they
into
have
the city.
PDS,
Yeah.
Presbyterian Day School, that meets in their building.
Yeah.
A lot of similarities that we have with North Point, and you are on PDS's board.
That's right. Yeah.
And you have been instrumental in just helping me think through things like that. So
and they because their proximity to Memphis, they have made attempts at making even a PDS education accessible for across ethnic backgrounds, economic background. They've started a program called Young Scholars, which is completely funded by anonymous donors that pays tuition for students that can qualify to go, and then they build into that the school, the whole culture of the school, a welcomeness to outsiders.
And that feeds into Memphis University School.
Yes, that's right.
And
which has increased.
Ali tells me all the time the families his children go to birthday parties to and with some pretty big names. I won't name any names.
That's right.
Of organizations that have airplanes and shipping and all that. But so you're connected in that world. Yeah. But you're not of that world.
Right.
I mean, Ali will say you won't believe how they eat.
Right.
At these birthday parties. But you connect in so many different worlds so well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So all that to say, going back to it's hard, it's difficult. So I wonder where would we be if we had stayed on Shelby? Well, who knows?
Right.
But we moved, and I'm going to say this selfishly, okay, maybe sinfully. I'm glad we moved because how would if you I'm just giving you the depth of my wicked heart, okay? If Broadway had called me and they were on Shelby Drive struggling with a gentrified congregation in 2020, and I know Shelby Drive well. I mean, I know where Pop Tunes was, and I used to go to that McDonald's, and every year the highlight was to go to the Southland Mall and see their gigantic weird-looking tree out in the parking lot. And so, I grew up in that area. My first job was Graceland in that area. I know Whitehaven like the back of my hand. Right. And, if they had said to me, yeah, we're still in Whitehaven in 2020, I would have paused long and hard and gone, I don't know about that. Right. So let's just be honest. Yeah, I mean, I'm being completely honest with you. That would have been a struggle. In a lot of ways, selfishly, I'm glad they moved. Now, when I'm talking to church pastors today, so we went down and talked with this church, good church in our community. They are known for planting churches. They plant like 80 billion churches a month. And so this church that's doing all this church planting, and they're all about it, and they're a popular church, the pastor's extolling the virtues of church planting, and I just he said, do you have any questions? And I raised my hand, and I said, well, you're planting in Lewisburg, and you're planting in Coldwater, and blah, 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 blah. But is anybody planting in Memphis? And there's this dumbfounded look in the room. Nobody's going north. Nobody's going north. And I said, so, there's no plans to try to reach the falling apart city up there. And honestly, the pastor was just like, no, that's not really our focus. We really aren't looking there. We're looking more at, what's the town, Senatobia and all that. And, yeah, those places definitely need churches, definitely need the gospel. But I'm like, if our strategy for church planting is going where the white folk run, I don't know that that's much of a strategy. And I'm not saying that's what is happening. I'm just saying, okay, and that's what you're saying. A lot of the growth that we've seen, it's just people moving around. They're just church hopping. I mean, I can point to you to a church that started up by Liberty and is now the largest church in DeSoto County with multi-campuses. They were one church across the street from us. They moved down here, and, there was a whole story there. But I'm not saying all their members, but there's a whole lot of people that left this church to go there. There's a whole lot of people that left Longview to go there. There's a whole lot of, and so you can definitely be honest and say, there are a whole lot of people just church hopping.
Yes.
And
that's why the discipleship piece is so important. I think the church as leaders, because we've operated out of fear instead of vision, We've tried to coddle and feed into the movements of Christians who are consumeristic in some ways, who are trying to find. Some get so tired. They stay at a church for 5 years and they leave 5 years later. I mean, they always are doing this. It's like a drug to them, And we kind of feed into that by supporting it, and that's where I'm saying is that the call of discipleship that I think Scripture is calling us to go out and make disciples of all nations. It doesn't mean it's the missing component to a lot of what we're doing. And it doesn't mean, like you said, it's not a numbers game. It is reaching people who are far from the gospel. And I know church planting can do that. When you have a new church plant, sometimes it gets people excited about serving, but that's not the solution. And so we have to think more gospel-centered and less me-centered, us-centered as a community, because ultimately what we're doing may solve problems on the ground right now, but it's creating a wave that we're going to see happen, 20 years down the line. And the reason we see a decline in the church is not, I don't think it's just because of social dynamics, because if you look at the book of Acts and you study it deeply, they dealt with most of what we're dealing with today, whether it be gender questions or sexuality questions. That was a very non-Christian, very secular environment. I don't think that's our biggest challenge. I think our biggest challenge is Christians who are all about themselves and who lead out their lives. It's this constant flow of what's best for me, what would make me most happy, and not being a part of the mission that Jesus has called us to. And if we can engage as missionaries we're in a missionary in a foreign land, you would never run from the people moving in. You would always view those people as an opportunity to reach them with the gospel. Some people, I can't remember who it was saying that the nations is coming to us. That's what we should think, is that as people from outside of our community come into our community, God is sending the nations to us. I know some of us are like, well, that's not the nations, that's just Memphis. Well, that's a part of the nations, and your ability, your opportunity to reach Memphis, maybe it can even start in South Haven, and so so I think that we could as leaders, as churches, keep following the trends of unhealthy, Christ followers, or we can try and attempt to set the trends by not being so quick to run and being more focused on making disciples. There are some big leadership questions that are hard really to answer. Like you said, like what would this church be if it stayed in Whitehaven? Of course, it wouldn't be the same. It couldn't be the same.
And vice versa.
And whether that be right or wrong.
The school would have died.
Right.
I mean, the school was dying.
Right.
And so it was like move or die.
Right. That's right. And so those are some hard questions to answer. And one thing we have to guard ourselves against is shame, and keep pushing ourselves towards the mission. And if I think where the problem is if that's the sole focus of what we do as a church is our survival, I think ultimately we won't survive in the long run. And so even if a church were to move into another community, it has to be it can't be solely because we need to survive as an organization, but instead this is and not spinning it as a mission, right? But what can we do? Even a church were to think about moving, what we could do to plant some roots right where we're at, as we think about a conversation about moving. What can we do right now, even 20 years before that becomes an issue, to start developing within our people a missions mentality where they see their lives as missionaries, see their job as a mission field. They see their neighborhood as a mission field before that. And that's where a lot of the missing pieces come, is that we just kind of are doing what we can do to survive. And one of the examples of of a lot of churches is they move and they don't survive because there still was that missing piece of seeing my life, my church, my community as a mission field. And I would say this too, churches have life cycles. I think about that at Mosaic. Will Mosaic always live? I don't know. I don't think
that right there is a great point.
Right.
You're right. Churches are bodies.
Right.
Local churches are bodies. Ultimately, the body of Christ that never dies. But local bodies live and die.
Right.
They're birthed.
The church is always alive.
They live and they die.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so when it's kind of like what they leave behind is fertile ground for something new to arise.
A new baby.
Yes.
And case in point, biblically, is Revelation 2 and 3, where you have 7 churches, none of them which exist today locally.
Right.
Now, there may be local churches in the community of Philadelphia or Sardis or whatever it's called now, but it's not that local church that the letter was written to. And that shows you that churches are not guaranteed Broadway will live forever.
Right, that's right.
And
that shouldn't be...
Or Mosaic will live forever.
Right. That shouldn't be our main goal or what drives all of our decisions. We can't be foolish and make decisions that lead to premature death of a church or community, but we also don't need to make our decisions based on that, because ultimately, like you said, the church is always going to survive. Jesus will build his church and nothing will stop it. The gates of hell won't be set against it. And so,
but your local church may change, adapt.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's hard. That's hard for pastors, because what pastor doesn't want a growing church? Yeah. That's his livelihood.
Well, I think about McLean is a great example. McLean was a church that embraced the neighborhood. They, back before, in that building, I think was built in the 50s, and in that neighborhood there was a big transition. Their Jewish synagogue and temple there, they had moved, and the pastor, and I don't remember which one, had wrote his dissertation on the church's decision to stay and how they opened their church up for the diversity around them. And I love one of the first things that they did that was really rejected in the community, and this is not the Christian community, this was Midtown, was that they allowed some ministry, like a school group, to use their building, which brought in a group of African-American students into the building. And it was the neighborhood that was unhappy seeing black students outside in the building. And I think about, he talked about deacon meetings and stuff like that, about whether they should move or whether they should stay, and they decided to stay. But I'm so glad they did, because we would look at that and say McLean stayed and died. But actually, McLean stayed and is living again. Even it's got an M in his name, right? It's not
Mosaic.
McLean, it's Mosaic now.
Yes. And
it's making a great impact. And it's just the impact is astronomical, through the different ministries that are there, through the church, and in a part of the community that is so progressive and now more affluent, but still there's still a gospel presence there. This last Sunday for the first time, we had a group of about 5 Rhodes students at our church, and different views of sexuality that they represented, but they were there, and they came. And I think that what McLean left behind as it died, it was a fertile ground for a new church like Mosaic. So I often feel like we're just an extension of what McLean was.
Man, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Now, what year did this pastor write the dissertation, and what year was all this?
It was back in the 70s, 80s, I think.
Oh, so we're talking a long time ago.
Yeah, long time ago. Yeah, the neighborhood over in the Valentine Evergreen community began changing in the 60s and 70s.
Wow, I would love to read that dissertation.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you?
I have it. I
You
can
do?
send. Yeah.
Oh, send me a copy.
Right.
You always have everything. I say,
Well,
hey,
somebody-
what does this
somebody
place
sent that in the
have?
mail.
And then you give it to me, and then I'm like, how do you get this stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want.
One of the former pastors at Living Hope sent it to me from
That's
DC.
awesome.
Yeah.
That is,
He had
I would
it in
love
his
to read
library.
that. Will
Yeah.
you?
I will.
Is it digital?
Well, I can make it digital.
Well, or
I'll
I'll
send it
just
to you.
borrow it next
Right,
time. I need to
right.
come up and see you
That's right.
at the church again. We always like
right.
to go eat at Babalu's.
Babalu's, yeah.
Yeah, on Cooper.
Yeah. It's on Overton Square.
Overton Square, yeah.
Yeah.
Which, used to be a TGI Fridays.
Oh, really?
I think either that or what's the other fancy steakhouse right there? It's not Porch and Parlor.
Oh,
Porch and
okay.
Parlor. I think that was the TGI Fridays back in the day.
Okay.
Back in the day when Overton Square was hip,
Right.
fun, and cool.
Yeah.
I guess it still is.
When we were over there, when we first started Mosaic, Overton Square was pretty dead. There was nothing
really?
open. Yeah, and then
So
it
they
started,
revitalized?
It started revitalizing when we
Because like
started.
the 90s, the 80s and 90s, it was the place to be.
Really?
Yeah.
I
'cause
think in the late '90s it started to decline. Early 2000s, there was a lot of stuff was closed, and the revitalization, people moving back into the city, brought new life.
Yeah, I love what they've done to it now, and it looks good. And yeah, because you used to go down there, you could eat at TGI Fridays, and then you could go to Playhouse on the Square.
Right. That's
And
right.
you could watch
a movie,
Spitfire Grill, so or whatever they were doing at the time. And
Yeah.
so yeah, that was always fun.
Yeah.
Well, so Ali, I'm just again, I just can't say it enough. Thankful for the ministry that you have and how God has orchestrated your story and put you where you are. It's an encouragement to us here to say, okay, this is where God has landed us, and things. I mean, I don't mean to imply DeSoto County is bad or anything like that. I just, I'm a thinker,
Right.
and you're a thinker, and we're always thinking, and that gets us in trouble sometimes.
Right.
When we're always thinking, and so if you could go back and do anything different, what would you do? In youth group or high school or just whatever, with who you are, or would you say, I wouldn't do anything different? God's done it well.
Well, I mean, I would say yes and no, because I think so much of my struggles, it is something that God has used in my life. So it's hard to say I would do anything different because it has so shaped my life. The difficulties, the challenges, the loneliness, but also has created a story that helps others, in their feelings of loneliness and not fitting in, and so I wonder if anything were to change in that, and I were to be able to be in a different place where that wouldn't be a big issue, it wouldn't have. I don't know if God would have used or created a story that would have impacted a church like Mosaic, and so.
Yeah, well, may God bless what you're doing.
Thank you.
And bless,
Thank
of
you.
course, what we're doing.
Yes.
And so I got to end this because your
Yes.
mother, when she'd always call you, can I do it? Can I do the little call? Remember?
Oh.
She would always call you, and the whole youth group would say it when they wanted to call you as well. So Ali's mother, being Iranian, she would say, Ali, 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 Ali. And everybody would do the same thing, and we would call Ali when you were late or when you needed to come to the bus or whatever. So still Prince Ali, here you are.
That's me.
That's fantastic. All right, well, brother, I love you.
Yeah,
Thank you for being
love
on
you
the
too, brother.
podcast. I'm so glad we're living in the same city. We've got to do things more.
That's right.
We're
That's
always
right.
so busy.
Yeah,
You're always so busy.
Get you to come and preach.
I got to get you to come and preach,
Yeah.
and I'd love for that to happen. And we're always like, let's get together. And then it took me 4 weeks to get you to sit down at this podcast because you're so busy. And I'm like, come on, Ali, come on.
Right.
Just sit down with me. So we did it, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. And on that note, that's Footnotes. And that's another episode of our podcast, Footnotes. We drop our podcast each Friday, so be sure to tune in, check us out, and listen. Footnotes is a ministry of Broadway Baptist Church located in South Haven, Mississippi. We're located right outside of the metro Memphis area. You can learn more about us by visiting us online at broadwaychurch.org. Until next time, it's Footnotes.